What if I told you that the most famous footballer of the early 2000s, aside from David Beckham, was Hidetoshi Nakata? Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, I was surprised too, but according to multiple reports from back in the day, it really was. You see, he was the first big Asian football player, and not only did that novelty capture everyone's attention in Europe, it sent shockwaves through Japan. At the time, baseball was by far the biggest sport in the country. Football didn't stand a chance. Even Nakata says he only decided to pick up football over baseball because he was obsessed with reading Captain Tsubasa comic books. He saw football as a sport from another world, saying that growing up, he didn't have any heroes, no players that he imitated because he didn't even know they existed. And that may just be why he never realized the immense talent he had, saying, "I never saw myself as a good player. That's why I knew I had to do more, I had to work more." And it was through this incredible work ethic, his charisma, and honestly his good looks, that he propelled himself and the entire nation of Japan to the top of the footballing world, all before falling out of love with it and beginning to consider quitting at the age of only 25. Okay, we'll get there, but first let's focus on how it started, because it's some wild stuff. As much as his dedication to his craft was much of what made him so notorious, he also just happened to have tremendous timing. Right as he was starting to make some waves, the J-League, Japan's first professional football competition, was created. Then just 1 year after that, he scores in the Under-17 World Cup, and suddenly 11 out of the 12 clubs in the J-League were offering him professional contracts. And even once he made his choice, picking Belmar Iratsuka, he immediately helped him to a victory in the Asian Cup Winners' Cup before scooping the award for Asian Player of the Year the following season at just 19 years of age. In the blink of an eye, he had written his name in the history books of Japanese football, and there was still so much more to come, because that same year he joined Japan for the Olympic Games. They were supposed to have stood no chance. They hadn't been in the competition for 28 years, and the overall sentiment was that they were bound to get humiliated. But then they opened the tournament with a win against Brazil, a team that included Rivaldo, Ronaldo and Roberto Carlos, all of them outshined by Nakata. Still, despite winning 2 out of their 3 games, thanks to a fair share of bad luck, Japan didn't make the knockouts. However, that was no problem. They just moved on to an even more important task, ensuring qualification to their first ever World Cup. Nakata instantly took command of the team, 5 goals in 11 matches. And when it all boiled down to a playoff match between Japan and Iran, knowing only one team would make it and having to go up against the great Ali Daei, 20-year-old Nakata assisted all 3 of Japan's goals in an incredible comeback that earned him once again the Asian Player of the Year award, but above all, cemented him as the greatest wonder kid to ever come out of East Asia. Once at the World Cup, he didn't leave anything on the table. He even dyed his hair blonde so he would stick out more to the European scouts. And in the first match against Argentina, despite going up against the likes of Zanetti and Simeone, Nakata was completely unfazed, tearing holes in their defense like it meant nothing. You know how people use the expression, toying with the defense? Well, when asked about it, he said, "When I play football, I feel like a child, and a child always wants to play with the best toys." So yeah, Zanetti might have been scary to many, but to Nakata, it was literally just a toy. Though, to be fair, he went on to say, "We didn't really know what a World Cup was, so in a way it was like we had no pressure." So that might be why he seemed so unimpressed. Despite his best efforts, Japan lost all 3 matches by a single goal, but no matter what, he became a fan favorite, which meant once the tournament ended, everyone came knocking. Sir Alex wanted to bring him to Old Trafford. Arsenal also came into the mix, but to his eyes, there was only one league in Europe. It was the late 90s, and the Serie A ruled the world, and Nakata was dying to get in on the action, which was also why, fearing he would be benched or even worse, loaned out, he rejected Juventus and joined Peruggia instead for a fee of 4.7 million euros, becoming the second ever Japanese player to join the league, only preceded by the legendary Kazu Miura. He went from being a nobody to playing in the most prestigious league in the world in just 5 years. Everyone in Japan had their eyes on him, which was why his first statement would be, "I never meant to become an idol, but now I must not disappoint anyone." However, no matter how encouraging these words could be, the Italians were still unimpressed. Everyone saw his signing as only a strategy to sell more shirts, just another marketing gimmick. And to be fair, they weren't necessarily wrong. He sold a lot of shirts. Some sources claim up to 70,000 in just the days following his announcement. However, it was obvious the problem for the Italians was that at the time, it was hard to imagine a Japanese player succeeding. But soon, they wouldn't have to imagine. Right on his debut match, with 5,000 Japanese fans traveling all the way to Italy to watch him from the stands, Nakata scored 2 goals against Juventus. By the time January came around, goals against the likes of Fiorentina, Milan and Lazio had followed, and with Nakata delighting every single fan with his silky smooth touch, the greatest prize followed, a nomination to the Ballon d'Or and the FIFA World Player of the Year. He was just 20 years old. From there on out, his fame rose exponentially. Japanese reports from back then joked that he was more loved and famous than the emperor himself. In Peruggia, 20 Japanese reporters followed him everywhere. They tracked what he ate, how he styled his hair, and any other scoop into his private life. It got so bad, security frequently had to drag them out of the training pitch. Nakata Mania was in full flow. Even minor friendlies had to be broadcasted across the world. And suffocating among all of it, to try to appease the fans' wishes, Nakata created a blog where he would update them about his life. It was read by 15 million people every single day. Regardless, his football was never affected, and following another nomination to the Ballon d'Or as well as the award for the best foreign player in the Serie A, Roma came in and secured his signing for 22 million euros, a ludicrous fee at the time, which made him the most expensive Asian player of all time by a landslide. Just imagine that same year, Henry, who was only 1 year younger, moved from Juventus to Arsenal for 8 million less. Regardless, in his first full season with Roma, his biggest worries began materializing. With several other great foreign players in the team like Cafu and Batistuta, the team's struggles with fulfilling the league's quotas for homegrown players led him to struggle for game time, and even when he got it, as a way to accommodate for the great Francesco Totti, he often ended up being played in a more defensive role that didn't exactly suit him. But even among all of this, in just 31 minutes, he turned himself into a club legend. With 5 games left in the season, Roma were on top of the league table with a chance to win their first league title in 28 years, and it was at that exact moment that they were forced to play against second-place Juventus. Just 6 minutes into the match, they were losing 2-0. 50-something minutes later, nothing had changed. But then, Totti came out for Nakata, with his first few touches of the ball scored a massive goal from outside the box, humiliating Van der Sar, all before assisting another goal to tie the match in the very last minutes. However, things became even more difficult when Nakata was forced to make an impossible decision. The final 2 matches against Napoli and Parma, both very difficult matches, coincided with the Confederations Cup, and Japan was in the competition. Nakata made a deal with Roma. He would miss the game versus Napoli so he could play the group stage, and then he'd come back. But against all odds, Japan ended up in first place in a group that included Brazil, and Roma drew their match against Napoli. But it was fine. After some more bargaining, Nakata was allowed to miss a few more training sessions, as important as they were, so he could play the semifinals. But I kid you not, the guy scored and put Japan in the final, meaning that at this point the choice was simple. He either went rogue, going against the wishes of the club, missing even more training sessions so he could play the final, or he went back and joined Roma for the last chapter of their season. As hard as it was, he went with a safer route and watched from afar as Japan lost the final to France. At least he got a silver medal, the bronze ball, and a place in the team of the tournament. All while in Italy, everything went smoothly, with Roma beating Parma 3-1, keeping themselves 2 points above Juventus and securing the title. Regardless, it was those 31 minutes versus Juve that made the difference. The history books will forever show that Roma won the title, that the great Totti won the title, because of Nakata. Still, among all of this, the lack of minutes and honestly maybe a bit of resentment that he wasn't allowed to play the final led Nakata to begin looking for a move out of Roma. But once again, with the Premier League greats surrounding him, he looked the other way and joined Parma instead, a team that was seen as inferior to Roma, who after all had just won the league. Still, what was also equally shocking was the transfer fee, 28 million. Again, for perspective, that same year Van Nistelrooy was just 1 year older than Nakata, joined United for the exact same price. Despite not enjoying a particularly great start at his new club, soon Nakata earned another Ballon d'Or nomination, and even if Parma struggled massively in the league over the rest of the season, missing out on a European qualification there, Nakata made up for all of that, scoring the decisive away goal in the Coppa Italia finals, securing the trophy for his club, which also qualified them to the UEFA Cup when it already seemed impossible. With one more accolade to his name, Nakata was already the most successful Japanese player of all time. Back home, his fame was immeasurable. He was infinitely marketable. From Coca-Cola to MasterCard, Canon and Subaru, he was the perfect face for any product. Books about him sold in the hundreds of thousands. In Japan, he had taken football from a temporary fad to a major cultural phenomenon. They had never had a poster boy like him, and so they made the most out of it, bidding to host the World Cup alongside South Korea years earlier, and would you guess it, it was perfect timing once again. Just as his fame hit its peak, the tournament started, building upon his image and broadcasting Japanese football and its culture to the entire world. Nothing would ever be like before. At the World Cup itself, Japan started off with an impressive draw against Belgium, then cemented their place in the tournament with a win against Russia, and finally Nakata himself put on a man-of-the-match performance and even scored the second goal to beat Tunisia and take his country to the knockout stage. That was the pinnacle. In the last 16, Japan were beaten by dark horses Turkey. Nakata made it to the team of the tournament and collected one final nomination as FIFA Player of the Year. And once he made it back to Parma, it instantly became obvious things were going very wrong. The club he once knew was now looking very different. The arrival of Adriano and Mutu had changed everything. And though it was not all necessarily for the worse, as after all Parma would go on to finish in a much more hopeful 5th place in the league, the mentality in the locker room was now much different. As Nakata would describe it, I always felt my teams were like a huge family, but at one point that changed and it depressed me massively. In other words, he looked at his teammates and saw a bunch of money-hungry brats, more worried about acting like prototypical celebrities than playing the game itself, which to a man like Nakata, who grew up playing football with no idea he could get rich and famous off of it, was almost sacrilege. Alongside this, the new coach Prandelli forced him to play so deep that he barely got to put his skills to use, leading the two to frequently clash in training, and soon it looked almost as if Nakata lost all of his passion for the game as well. Only 18 months after his magisterial peak at the World Cup, he was being sent out on loan to Bologna. There, despite some problems with injuries, which certainly didn't make him any happier, his form improved and he was seen as one of the reasons Bologna avoided relegation. But as it seemed there was a light at the end of the tunnel, Parma, who were on the edge of bankruptcy, did not collaborate whatsoever, and with Nakata even willing to let go of his unpaid wages, they still refused every bid Bologna made, and he ended up at Fiorentina instead. Once there, things were never great, but after a season repeatedly trying to find joy on the pitch, the worst happened. Prandelli, the coach he had frequently clashed with, was announced as Fiorentina's future manager, and Nakata was left between a rock and a hard place, succumbing to the urge to run away and finally moving to England, though by then he was not joining United or Arsenal, but Bolton instead. Still, the fans were intrigued. Okosha and Nakata in the same team sounded like a blockbuster, but instead, things went from bad to worse. Just like Okosha, Nakata struggled to play under Sam Allardyce in a rigid 4-4-2 that desperately tried to shackle two of the most technical players of the decade. It was there that Nakata's last bit of love for football died, and so he made a secret pact with himself at just 28 years of age that after playing the World Cup in the summer, he would retire. It would end up being the most disappointing World Cup of his career, finally getting demolished by Brazil like the world had always told him he should have been. It was the last ever match of his career. Once the final whistle was heard, Nakata, who was known for being incredibly stoic, always calm and collected, surprised everyone by collapsing on the ground in tears, knowing he would soon announce his retirement. It was one of the unforgettable moments of that World Cup, and when looking back at all of it, he said, "Every day I realized more and more that football had become a big business. My teammates were playing for money, which sucked the fun out of everything, and above all, I played to have fun. Without that, there was nothing to play for."